Hello, everyone. Welcome to 5F Financial. Riley Smith with my host, Dan Kramer. Dan, good to see you.
Good to see you.
So, what are we talking about today? We are talking about 5 things that you could do with an old 401k. This impacts quite a few people, Dan. I mean, let's talk about real quick. When does somebody have an old 401k? When they leave a job, they go to a new job, right? Maybe they retire. Um, it could be a whole host of things that happen in life. Maybe they change careers. Um, but those are probably the 2 or 3 most common things that I see when somebody leaves an old job, they retire, and they're like, what do I do with the old retirement account that I had? What are my options? And so that's what we're talking about today because it does impact a lot of people, especially with what's the average? I saw a stat the other day. The average amount of jobs that people have, I think, in a lifetime now is like 5 or 6 different jobs. So this happens, quite frequently. Where in the past, like my dad had one job basically his entire life. This wasn't
Mhm.
as applicable. So let's dive in. What's the first thing, Dan, that somebody could do with an old 401k or retirement plan?
Yeah, so if you switch jobs, you're going to get a notice in the mail shortly after that says, hey, your 401k is eligible to roll it over or cash it out or leave it alone. There's a couple more we're going to teach you as well. But a lot of times, if you're just like, maybe it's not a big amount, maybe it doesn't excite you, maybe you're not sure what to do, you could just leave it there. The current custodian would probably be happy to keep it there, leave it in their pool of funds, could continue to collect fees off of it. And maybe you're really happy with the returns. Probably not, but maybe you are. And so that is an option. You can leave it. You can leave it right there. And
And
yeah,
what's one of the cons for the old employer? A lot of times why they get a notice to say, hey, you need to move this is because it's a fee for the employer every single year to keep your old account basically and to maintain it. So a lot of times it could be 3 months, it could be 6 months, it could be years after where you leave this old job that you get a notice to say, hey, you need to move this because you're costing us money.
yeah, yeah.
So
Yeah, and depending on the fees and depending on the returns and stuff and how they set it up initially, they might make you move it, but sometimes they don't. Sometimes they don't tell you about it. Sometimes we meet with people and they don't even realize they had an old 401k. And
right,
it's like,
yeah.
oh, you should probably call your HR and see if you got any money there. And they're like, oh, I didn't think
Mm,
about that. And then they do,
yeah.
and then they can move it. So yeah, leaving it alone is an option. Not probably the best option that we would recommend, but it is an option.
Yep. Number two, I mean, you could technically, you alluded to this, you could cash it out, but if you're below 59 and a half years old, what happens? You get a 10% penalty, basically an excise tax. And if you're below 59 and a half and it's a tax deferred vehicle, a traditional 401k, let's say, you're going to pay taxes on that. So you're going to give maybe away 30 or 40% of that.
Mhm.
And that's an issue. So if you had $100,000, you'd only be walking away with 60 or 70,000, and you're going to give a good chunk of that to the government because you didn't abide by the law. So a lot of times people don't cash that out. Now, I raise my hand here and I will say I did that. I did that years ago when I left an old job. I cashed it out, and what did I use it for? I used it to buy a laptop and some other things to start up my financial business. So for me, it ended up being, yeah, I had to pay that 30% in taxes with the fee, but it ended up being a good investment in myself. So I can't legally sit here and say that you should cash it out. That's not financial advice. But what I can say is your best investment is and always will be yourself. And so I took that plunge, I burnt those ships, so to say, and I used my old 401k to start my business.
Yeah, and I would just say sometimes it's not sometimes the best option could be for you to cash it out.
Hmm.
If it's not a huge amount, maybe it's not worth the fees to transfer it to a new one because sometimes there's fees to set up the new accounts. And sometimes you're in such a low tax bracket, you're not making a lot of money anyway. You're not going to pay much in taxes. And if you in a hardship, you can sometimes get the 10% penalty waived. So it's case by case. But
Yeah.
if you got a $500,000 in an old 401k and you cash the entire thing out, you're probably not going to want to be giving 200,000 of that to the government. So yeah,
Right.
that would be not the greatest. But if you offset that taxes by buying real estate or something where you can not to get too technical here, but it's case by case. But option number 2 would be to cash it out, pull it out of that retirement account and basically use the remaining amount that gets sent to you however you'd like.
Yeah. If you go to a new job, here's option number 3. Let's say they offer a retirement plan, a 401k. You could technically roll it over, your old 401k, into the new one. You'd have to check with each custodian to make sure that they allow that. There'd be a lot of paperwork potentially involved with that. Sometimes you can work with your HR department to get that figured out along with the financial professional. But that typically is your third option, and there might be a vesting schedule to that. So keep in mind, if you start that new schedule over again with a new company, you might roll over $100,000, but anything beyond that isn't vested. So if you're contributing your max year every year, $20,000 a year plus, all of that is not yours, right? So you have to weigh those options out to say, yeah, maybe I want to do that because I get an employer match that can kind of springboard me into the future. That could be good, but you have to really look at all those options. So the third option that we educate people on is you could technically roll it over into your new 401k if it made sense to do so.
Yeah, and I mean, typically it's probably not one of my top options I recommend for people.
Agreed.
Because you could still, if you love your 401k at your new company, you can still put money into that new 401k.
New
But
money.
maybe we could take that old 401k money and do something to give you more control, more investment options, better returns, lower fees, all the things that we typically don't love about partnering with the government on our 401ks. So
Correct.
option number 3 would be to roll it to your new employer.
Option number 4, you could just open up a traditional or a Roth IRA, depending on which tax designation the retirement account was, because technically you have lower fees with those usually, and you have more investment opportunities, more investment options. You could have a financial professional manage that for you. You could manage it yourself just by going to Schwab or Vanguard or any of those brokerage houses out there. But a traditional or a Roth IRA could also be an option. That would be, I honestly, that would be one of the better options in my opinion, Dan. Number 4 being just getting those old 401k funds into a traditional or a Roth IRA.
Yeah. Anything that moves it from less control to more control is I think going to be better for you in the long run. And if you are going to roll it to a new traditional IRA, just make sure you're finding a company that is going to, keep the fees at a minimum, right? Because at the end of the day, if you just put it in a indexed Vanguard account with very low fees, you're probably going to perform similar to most of the managed accounts anyway. So why pay heavy fees to do that? So
correct.
Not investment advice, not disclaimer, but just my thoughts here.
Well, to your point though, over a 20 or 30-year time frame, those fees can take hundreds of thousands of dollars away from people. So if you don't have a way to recapture that or to minimize that, you really need to look at it. I think that the 5th option, which we are both huge fans of, is self-directing those funds, taking the old 401k, putting it into a self-directed account, whether that's what we call a QRP, qualified retirement plan, solo 401k, because those types of accounts you have even more investment options with, and typically a lower fee schedule as well. So can you highlight, Dan, some of the things that somebody could potentially invest in with a self-directed account?
Yeah. And what he's talking about there is sometimes people hear self-directing. The self-directing part in itself is not an investment decision. It's really who's housing your money. Do you want Edward Jones, or do you want, Vanguard or Fidelity or, your new employer? They're housing it, but then inside of those accounts, you have to choose investments. And a lot of times they'll just choose mutual funds for you. But inside of a self-directed account, you can invest in a whole host of things, really anything, as long as you stay within a few guidelines of making sure that money never mingles with your personal money, right? So keep that in mind. So maybe you're like, man, I really want to partner with Dan and do some real estate investing, right? You could do that with those funds, or you want to partner with, somebody else and do real estate, or you want to buy some property. There's ways you can use your retirement funds to get into real estate and pick up some of the advantages of owning real estate. You could buy cryptocurrencies if you're into that sort of thing. You could be a debt lender and lend your money out and just make a fixed 8 or 12% rate of return on your money, right? You could borrow against your funds and use that money however you want and pay it back to yourself on a debt note, right? That kind of lowers the risk of that money if you know you're going to pay yourself back there. There's a whole host of things. You can do all the same stuff in the stock market, bonds,
Yeah.
mutual funds, all the stuff that you would over there. Typically, though, you could do it with much less fees. You have checkbook access to the money, so you literally can log in like a bank account and move the funds to an investment however you choose. You are the custodian, which ultimately lowers that custodial fee as well and lowers some of the transaction fees that you would pay on a typical account. So I'm probably missing a bunch, but really, we can buy gold and silver. You can do collectibles with, well, there's certain rules on some
Yeah.
collectibles, but yeah.
You gotta be, yeah, you can't buy fine art or stamps. There are very specific rules, and needs to be an arm's length relationship between, you and properties. And there's different things you need to be aware of. But again, the high level thing we wanted to accomplish today was there are typically 5 things that you can do with an old retirement account. So if you do have an old retirement account, a 401k, whatever it may be, let us know. We can help you. We can help guide and really try to figure out what would be best for your situation. Every person is unique, and every situation is as well. So you really need to look at. We talk about the 3 phases of your financial life. You have your accumulation phase, your distribution phase, and then your preservation. So it needs to make sense for all 3 of those phases. We cannot, and we should not, have a tunnel vision approach and just look at one of those phases. But I think that's a good stopping point there, Dan. Do you have anything else you want to add?
No, just like you said, reach out if you have questions. We've never charged somebody to have a free consultation, and we could take a peek at what you have and help you understand what your options are to move it to something else and what you can do with it. So reach out if you have any questions, and yeah, we'll talk to you later. Thanks.